Hey there. Let's quickly discuss Purview and how to use advanced resource sets effectively. We're also going to go through a couple of use cases and scenarios and just explain some of the differences or different approaches we can take. So, um, first we need to, in order for us to work with advanced resource sets, we need to enable them. So we click on the Manage Hub, click on Overview, and then ensure that advanced resource sets are enabled. If this is not enabled, you're not going to be able to access the pattern rule configuration and manage advanced resource sets. So let's first think of a scenario where advanced resource sets would help. So for instance, if we think about a folder structure in a data lake, right, where we have, and this is a sample structure that may exist, right, where we have things like, you know, a raw zone where we load data that belongs to data domain from a source type like API, SFTP, whatever it may be, right? Um, from a source that has an origin in some source system that has some schema and has entities, and then we slice it into the year, the month, the day, and the hour that this data was dumped, right? Simple example. If we look at file name, you know, it's not particularly useful. And if we think about this structure, what we really have here is one entity, right? It doesn't matter how many files we've loaded in you know in how many days. What we really care about is this entity, and we might also care about combination of entities, right? Or combination of attributes from down the line as well. Like for instance, we might want to have you know the source system of I don't know. Um, I don't know, Dynamics 365 customer, right? We might want to have combinations of names, as how we see these things, right? So basically, what advanced resource sets are good for are to coalesce a structure and enforce a certain way of seeing the entity itself, right? Another way um, that, or another thing that um, advanced resource sets are good at handling are things like if I accidentally um, scan a folder that I want to coalesce into one folder name. So now if I have a dumping ground with 200,000 CVs in it or Word documents, I might not want to see every single Word document in there, right? I want to perhaps see, uh, you know, Word documents. So if this is um, let's say it's a CV dump or a CV library dump. Um, so I'm expecting there to be Word documents and PDF documents, etc. I can create a pattern rule that will, instead of bringing through each and every Word document um, and PDF document for or each and every CV, and then giving them names and inventorying them into a data catalog, which is not necessarily appropriate. What I can do is I can coalesce them into one or two objects. Right? So I can create a pattern rule for PDF CVs and one for Word document CVs, and then create an advanced resource set pattern rule for that. That will allow me to not only collapse the entire catalog and make it smaller and compact and more efficient, uh, it will also help me remove a lot of noise and mess that can cause confusion. And also, I remove a whole bunch of cost in my catalog. Cool. So that's a couple of use cases. Let's step through them and what they may look like. So um, when we so let's say in this case we're scanning this folder structure, right? So I need to create a pattern rule, and I have done so already. I click in on the data map, click in on pattern rules, and I can see here my the storage account that we're talking about, right? I have created a standard pattern rule to handle raw files that have Parquet files in the raw zone. And in here, what I'm doing is I am making sure that the entity the entity folder is what's going to be used. The name of that entity folder is going to be used um, for my naming convention of my entity, right? So if we go through here, we have two types of replacers. So well, let's step into this and modify this rule. So if we zoom in quick, so we have in the qualified name here, we looking at these things called replacers. Now, replacers are ways of either creating a static replacer, so something that's going to form part of the qualified name, unique and provide uniqueness. And then we have dynamic replacers, which are not part of the final name, but will just indicate that there is, an aggregation at that point. So if you think about this from a SQL Server perspective, all the static replacers are fields or attributes, or fields or columns that form part of a group by clause, right? So group by domain, type, system, schema, entity, right? And then the dynamic replacers, those are your aggregations, right? So, count year kind of thing, right? So these would be your aggregations, your sums, your counts, and whatever. So that you will see these will form part of a unique row, and these will just be placeholders that will be collapsed and coalesce, right? So what I've done is, well, I've in this case I've created a whole bunch of static replacers, right? And they define. We have, if we go through to the documentation, uh, we can see that we have a whole bunch of different data types that we support in the replacers. So string, int, GUIDs, dates, time, timestamp, etc. Right? And these will allow you or allow Purview to parse whatever it finds, right? So if we look here, we can see that, sorry, if we look at the folder structure, which looks like this, we can see that we have now chosen the, the, where's the entity there? The entity, which is string value, to enforce as our display name. Now, one thing that we have to be aware of is that, first of all, this is applied to or scope to a storage account at a certain folder path, right? So start of a folder path underneath that storage account. This happens to be just a container, right? So it's the root path in the container raw. And then from there on, um, we have then sort of walked through the substructure, right? And we've aggregated everything, and then we have our last little condition, which is a literal. It needs to end in .parquet, right? So if Purview scans this data lake zone or data lake, right, and this container, the raw container, it will look for this pattern, right? And it will look, including the literal of the end of the file terminator. When it matches, it will apply this structure. And as you can see, I've created this as our standard raw Parquet rule, right? Now, I can have multiple rule sets. So I can create a standard. So if we go ahead, I'm just going to go ahead and edit this guy. Right. Go copy. And then I create a new. So I want to have my, what did I call this? A standard underscore raw underscore av row, maybe, right? So we have avro files. And I'm going to, set up or just paste this value in. Instead of .parquet, I go avro. And then again here, I place in the double braced static replacer for entity. And this is how I'm going to name it. Right? This means that from an engineering pattern, I'm expecting a certain standard to be followed. And this ensures that I get the result in the catalog will always be the same, no matter what the file name is or what characters you are. As long as you follow the same folder structure and the same file extension, we're not going to get any weirdness coming through. Hit create, hit OK, and we're done. Right now, if I create a pattern rule at a lower grain, right? So you see this one, and I think I see an error here. There's a double slash that shouldn't be there. At a finer scope or lower scope, right? So this is for the finance domain, right? So I have finance domain Parquet generic. I have finance JSON generic, and then I've got this API JSON one, which is a bit of a different one. So if we look into the API one, I've chosen to use a combination of attributes to define an entity, because the way we've agreed to load data into the raw zone when it comes to APIs is slightly different. For instance, instead of the schema, we have a version string, right? And then we have, again, the entity string. But I want these, and this obviously has a JSON end, right? I want the display name to show the entity and the version. And the reason I do this is because I might have different versions of the entity, if that makes sense. So as we go along, and I want to make sure that I get a unique entry in the catalog per version. If I didn't incorporate the version, right? So I could here remove or make the version a dynamic replacer. That means that for all versions, doesn't matter what they are, as long as they're from the same system and the same entity, they would coalesce into one. So I wouldn't see version differences. Um, and and this gives me then greater control in how I can sort of automatically curate, how we can, name objects in the catalog. Cool. So if I hit, I'm just going to hit update and off we go. Now, what I want to say as well is that if you've created a pattern rule that applies to a storage account in a folder that has already happened or already been scanned once before, and you have a whole bunch of entities in it. During the maintenance window, which happens every 12 hours, I believe, these pattern rules will be fired and run against the catalog in this, according to their scope. And that means that if you had a case where you didn't have a resource sets defined, or resource sets weren't defined correctly, and you'd had all weird namings, these would then resolve that within the next sort of 12 to 18 hours. And it's so it's important that you understand that just because you set up a pattern rule doesn't mean that it's going to automatically be applied straight away. The ultimate fix for this is obviously to run a scan again, and that will automatically collapse the entire environment. But more, if you go through the documentation, all of this is apparent, right? So all of the details are available in the docs. I hope this has been useful and informative. And yeah, I hope you learned something. Thank you.